Well, hello everybody and welcome to the first session of Secrets to Success in the Pearl of the Orient with my massively photoshopped picture, which we had a good laugh about a second ago. And I'm very fortunate to have a good friend of mine here, Oliver Hasler, who I've learned an awful lot from over various lunches, and I'm so grateful that he agreed to come and do this podcast, because there's a lot of people in Hong Kong and the world that can learn a lot from this gentleman. And I will name just one of his accomplishments amongst many, but he was named as top 50 CEO in Spain, and to me, to be named the top 50 CEO in a country like Spain means you are top of your game. And he is also the chairman and of one of the biggest zirconia mining companies in the world. I think maybe the biggest, is it, Oliver?
Not yet. We're
not yet.
In the process of doing so.
Getting there, yeah. So, Oliver, I was hoping today that with this podcast we're running, we will be able to talk to people like yourself and share nuggets of gold with the future generations of Hong Kong. And Hong Kong's gotten a lot of bad press lately, right? And we've spoken about this many times. And I want this show to go out there to show people that Hong Kong is actually, there's a lot of great things happening in Hong Kong. There's a lot of great people here, and there's a lot of great business to be had. And don't believe everything you read, So we're going to bring people, successful gentlemen like yourself, who I aspire to be like one day, and let you do all the talking. And and start with, how did you get to where you are today? And I think we'll start from from as far back as you want to go.
Thank you very much, Derek, for having me today. And it's a true honor to be here the first time you're running this. Secrets to success, I don't know if I have any secrets. I'll tell you some about mine, or I'll tell you some of other people. But the Pearl of the Orient, that I'm sure. And as you say, Hong Kong is a wonderful, wonderful city with a huge, wonderful quality of life. So we're very, very happy to be here in Hong Kong, and to be part of this huge growth that we're experiencing in this region of the world.
Good stuff. And you could live anywhere, Oliver. You could go and retire to a nice vineyard in Spain somewhere if you wanted to, and but you choose Hong Kong to be your base,
Well, I've lived in many, many places in the world. As you know, I grew up in Mexico. I'm from Swiss origin. I grew up in Mexico, studied in Switzerland, spent several years in the army in Switzerland. Went back to Mexico, where I got married, then worked many years out of the UK, Paris and France. Then I moved to Holland and Spain, always doing business internationally, and always enchanted about the Far East, doing business in China and other places in Asia.
I noticed when I first met Oliver in his office, actually, a mutual friend had introduced us, and Oliver's a highly successful individual. He's very humble, but he's highly successful, right? And I'll never forget it. He gave me a beautiful bottle of wine leaving his office. It was the first time I ever met Oliver. And I just thought to myself, that guy is really top class, He just knows how to treat people really well, because the details, And these are the things that we want to discuss today, the secrets. Because I think that's one of your secrets, by the way, how you tend to interact with people. And anytime I see you walking down the street, you always see you saying hello to people. And anytime you see me, you're always, hey, how are you, how's it going? And you always have time for people, So I'd like to understand a bit more about what makes Oliver, and how did you come from starting in the kind of business that you're in, to even today being CEO. And I see pictures of you in the mines digging with everybody else in the zirconia mines. It's just, you're not just your typical CEO, are you?
I don't know if I'm not a typical, but I've always tried to differentiate myself by being part of the operations. I made my entire career working in very heavy, big industry and in factories. And it's very, very important to spend a part of your time in the operations, to understand them, to make sure that the transformation is happening. And yes, to serve as an example to the people. So I do the same thing today. Also in our mining business, I spend half of my time in the operation and the other half of my time in the markets, be it investment markets or commercially.
Yeah, it's interesting because we see Oliver here and always dresses like a movie star, you know. But if you look on LinkedIn, you'll see he also gets in with the miners, and you know he's not afraid of getting in and doing the hard work. You know what I mean?
If you go to the jungle, you have to be dressed accordingly. So,
Yeah. But what interests me is that Swiss Mexican. Did you have was it a strong educational background, or were you one of these people that just worked your way up throughout the, like where was the start, and how did you kind of get all the way up in that kind of industry? You know, that's not an easy industry, Oliver, you're in.
yeah, I don't think there's a simple answer to that, Derek. I mean, on one side, yes, I made sure to have a very, very solid education. I studied an engineering degree in materials, so physics and chemistry of metals, plastics, and ceramics. I did a master degree in metallurgy. Afterwards, I did an MBA. I spent 2 years in the Swiss Army, where I finished as an officer. So I spent a considerable amount of time educating myself and in good universities, also learning leadership. But that's only part, I believe, on the education that got me to where I am today. I also consider myself a multicultural person. I mean multicultural and not only international, because in addition to speaking several languages and living in different countries, I think I understand the different cultures. And that's the most important, because one of the things, and I'm sure the same thing happened to you, at home they educated us and always told us, treat the people like they want to be treated.
Yeah, it's true.
But that's a big mistake. Mm-hmm. International, you cannot walk away like that. You have to treat people like they want to be treated. Yeah. And for that, you have to understand the culture and what they expect. And sometimes it's not what we learned. So at the end, I think it's important to have a solid education, but within the education there comes this multicultural. I think I'm also blessed with a high level of energy like you are. Yeah. I've always believed there's 3 levels of energy and only 2 are useful. Either you're full on or you're full off, yeah. But so does not work. So either you're resting or you're fully engaged and focused in your work, but you cannot go half-paced into what you're doing. Okay. And I see that on you from morning to evenings. You're either fully in. Well, I don't hear about you, so you're probably fully off in those moments.
Oliver's the only person who texts me back at 3 a.m. in the morning. I just spoke to Oliver a moment ago. We had a conversation, and I said, I get up at 3. Oliver was like, yeah, so do I. And then I was like, I was wondering why you always message me back at those times, because nobody else does.
Well, some people do, but usually they're coming back. That's the time I wake up.
Yeah, which is hilarious, you know, which is great. And you've given me some real pearls of wisdom just throughout our lunches together, which I won't mention here because I'd like you to share on this podcast. But what you've learned through, because you have the corporate types, and if I look at the people who become CEOs, they're not always the most corporate. They're very people orientated, you know. They know how to treat people, as you said, how they want to be treated, which I never thought about before. I always say treat others as you'd like to be treated. But now I've learned something new. Treat others as they'd like to be treated. So whenever you go to different countries, do you change your strategy?
Absolutely. Yeah. You talk to people in different ways. I mean, you have lived here for a very long time. You know that we Westerners are very transactional. We go to meetings and it's black and white. We know what it means to win, what's to lose, which our objective was. So it's yes, no. In the Far East, you do not negotiate that way. There's much more of yin-yang. There's gray areas much more important. So it's a total different way of approaching it. And you know it's a mistake to coming into Asia as a Westerner and treating people as Westerners. The same way, it's a mistake the other way around. So depending in which country of the world you are, you have to understand the culture and how they do business if you want to be successful.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I was in the Uber car on the way over here, talking to the driver, and we were talking about China, you know, and I said when I go back to Ireland, I was on a radio show actually recently in Ireland, and I get asked the question, you know, about China. Is China really as bad as, you know, everyone says it is? And I said, look, man, I can only go by on my experience. I've never had a bad experience in the place. So, you know, I don't know what to believe here, what's real, what's not real. But you have to go and find out for yourself, you know. And I think you've been very good at that. You know, because you always spoke to me about how much you love Shanghai, and you know you have great admiration towards many different countries. But I've never ever heard you say anything negative about any country in particular. You know, you're always very open to the different cultures that you meet.
I am at the end. I mean, either you're a very good citizen of a particular country, and that's when you were born in a country, you grew up in that country, and you work in the country, or you become a very good international citizen. And since I couldn't do the first, I went for the latter one of them, and I focus on understanding the different countries of the world. I've always done business in many, many countries. I think I've done business in 90 countries in the world where I've either set up a business or operated or built a factory or done something. So I'm very, very happy about having had the opportunity of doing so. And this part of the world is fascinating. I mean, the growth and the speed of growth and the energy that the people put into is just fascinating.
Yeah, no, I agree with you for sure. And tell us about your organisation that's listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, because we had met before you had listed it, just before you had listed the organisation itself. And to list a company is a huge achievement in itself, you know.
Yes, it's funny because I had just finished the job you were talking about in Spain, where I was responsible of a listed company in Madrid, where we were in the foresting paper packaging business in France, Portugal, and Spain, Morocco. We had 30 factories in those countries, and I sold the business in 2019 to an English listed company. Then I was thinking, what's next? So I had done 20 years of restructuring and transformation in Europe, and was looking for a new challenge. And I was always fascinated by the Far East, but never had an opportunity to really living here. I came, first time I was in China was in 1999. And I thought, okay, now that we finished this challenge, I asked my wife if she was willing to the challenge, and we moved to Hong Kong. Then an investment bank asked me, so what are you going to do? I said, look, I'm going to set up a company and I'll see how we can participate in this growth. And the investment bank introduced me to some wealthy families in Indonesia and Kalimantan, Australians and Indonesians, that had a piece of land that they say was a very, very rich mine. And they asked us how they could valorize the business. So did my due diligence. We got geologists. We did a York report out of Australia. We got auditors involved and engineering companies from Australia. And actually it was a very, very rich zircon mine with a huge very high concentration compared to other mines in the world. So we listed the company in the Australian Stock Exchange in February 2020. We bought a second mine in February 2021. In November, we listed on the main market of the London Stock Exchange. And yes, here we are. We're very happy with our results. We have increased the volumes. We're reducing the cost. We started to produce byproducts, which are rutile and ilmenite. So very, very happy to have picked this investment in central Kalimantan and be part of the mineral sands mining industry.
Yeah, and you talk about this like it's normal, you know, which is normal for you, but I see the pictures of you at the mines, and it always strikes me, you know, you're one of the miners basically. You're not wearing the suits like you are now, and you're unshaven, and your hair hasn't, you know, you're not pushing your hair back, you know, you're one of the guys, you're getting stuck in there, right? And this really fascinates me, but for you it's normal, you see. But for people watching this show, that's not normal to all of a sudden you left your job, top 50 CEO, you get connected to some rich families in Indonesia, you spot a region that's rich in zirconium, you go through all the processes, and then you list that organisation in Australia, you know. That'd be fascinating to many people, and I'm sure there's lots of things you can say on a podcast. You have many, many interesting stories. But what I want to go to is, from everything you've learned, you must have become a master of hiring people. And, you know, I had lunch with your son, who's a credit to you, by the way. You know, I noticed that you put him into rugby and stuff like that. He's a big, strong lad, and, you know, you've obviously groomed him very well. What is it you're looking for? What do you look at in people when you see them, and you're thinking, you know, this guy has potential, this girl has potential. These are people who I want to have in my organisation. What are you looking for?
That's a tough question because you know that one of the most difficult parts in our job is to find the right people.
Yeah, for sure.
And the hit rate is not that high, right? If you do 50-50, it's pretty good. But I do try, I think it's important for people in a team and an organization to share the same values. And I've always believed that some of the values we have to have is one is simplicity. And I'm far from being a simple person, but I do think that in this very complex world, and each one of us is in a complex industry, in order to be able to make a difference, you have to be able to express your ideas and the things that you want to do in a simple way so that people understand it and don't get lost in the process. So it's an ability to concentrate very complex issues into simple ways to be able to get them across. I do think discipline is important. There are ways to do things, and at the end, creativity is a nice thing, but there's a balance between discipline and creativity. And even the biggest musicians in the world are incredibly disciplined persons. So there's ways of doing things. Organizations, the best cost-cutting organizations or marketing organizations in the world, all have a way of doing things. And it's a method that you develop over time, but you need certain people to follow that discipline. It's also important to have a strong sense of responsibility. You say what you do and you do what you say. I always told my children, and they hated it when they were young, is to say, in life there's two things. There's results and there are excuses.
Yeah.
And excuses don't count.
That's very true.
So at the end, you also have to have a strong sense of teamwork. I mean, we all are high energy driven people, but we have to work together, and you cannot work by yourself. And you have been in organizations that I have, where very, very talented people are just not capable of working as a team. And it is important that you do. Also, entrepreneurship, because at the end, not everything works out exactly the way you want to, but you continuously have to look for new ways of doing it. And for that, you have to have that sense. So I think those are values I've tried to develop myself, I believe in, but I also look for any member of my team, because every company is different and not everybody belongs into every company. So you need to have the right people for your company.
Yeah, it's very, very true. The one thing that maybe I'll seek your advice on the podcast here is that I really struggle with the whole balance thing, right? Personally, I actually don't believe in balance. I don't think there's a such thing. I think you're either really in on something or you're not. You know, you're either all in or you're not. There's no such thing as dipping your toe in the water. And after our podcast, I'm bringing my kid to his jiu-jitsu class, as I mentioned, you know. And however, probably at your stage, you know, you've already been named top 50 CEO in Spain. You know, you're probably set up for life and stuff like that, you know. But when you were on your way up, climbing the ladder to where you are right now, it must have been quite challenging managing all these responsibilities. You have your work, you have your family, you have your friends, you have this, you have that. How did you handle all of that and still be on the trajectory that you've been on?
When I mentioned balance, I don't think I was talking about that balance, because like you, is when you're in, you're 100% in, you're fully into it and focused in it, and that doesn't give you time for anything else.
Yeah.
So I don't think, again, you cannot go so into something. So I don't think it's that balance where you go with a half degree of energy into a problem. And I'm luckily that I have a wonderful wife, and she brings the balance in our life while I'm out working and traveling the world. And there was years where I spent 250 days outside of home. She was taking care of the home and the kids and everything around it. So we found our balance between the two of us. So if I wanted a life balance from 9 to 5, I should have worked for the government. I don't think you find that in a growing industry.
Well, there was a highly controversial guy on Instagram, won't mention his name, but he said, you know, if you want a man that goes home and has dinner with you every night, 5 or 6 o'clock, marry a poor man. You know, and it kind of kicked off a bit of a storm, but it's true. You know, you got to put in the hours and you got to do the work and you got to get up early. The reason I get up early like you is because nobody interrupts me between 3 a.m. and say 7 a.m. or until I go to gym or something like that. Nobody gets near me during those times, you know what I mean? but you have to maintain that discipline. It's hard for me because I don't know about you, but people who are very successful are also very extreme personalities, and it can go either way. It can go extreme in the destructive or extreme in the constructive. They'll be great at both, whatever they choose, How do you maintain your discipline?
I think part is nature, part is education, and and then, there's something we cannot forget, is experience as well.
Yeah, that's true.
I was not the manager I am today 20 years ago, and I've learned a lot from many people down the road. And again, it's a thing of being focused. You don't wake up in the morning and say, today I'm going to be disciplined. You have been in meetings where people come in and they talk about football first, and then the meeting starts and somebody's checking their mobile phone and they're doing something else and they stand up. And just companies have a discipline. I do not tolerate those type of behaviors, and I don't tolerate it for myself either. You go to a place, the meeting can be 15 minutes, but you don't go 45 minutes with a so-so energy. So you plan for discipline. You're not just disciplined, and you train your organization to be disciplined. And at the end, it's within the team, you come to an agreement. This is the way you conduct a meeting. This is the way we attack projects. This is the way we communicate to each other. And this goes again into our yin-yang. There's a place to be disciplined. There's a place to be creative. But it's not whatever happened in whichever moment. And each organization is different, and that's why at the beginning I mentioned not everybody is born to be in any country. I don't think you or I could work in any company. Well, there's certain companies where we belong and we're good in, and others where probably not.
But again, you want to respect your boss, right? You want to respect your boss, and you want to see your boss leading from the front. You want to see your boss bringing in the business. You want to see your boss living the life that they're telling everyone else to live, just like what you mentioned there. Like leading by example, which of course myself personally I've not always done. I try to do as much as I can. Of course I've slipped up at times, just like you mentioned yourself, through experience, and you learn from it and then you move on, But what would be, you might go back in time, what would you change, maybe something you've done in your life or things you've done where maybe you would change now if you could? Looking back, you might self-correct it or something like that. Is there anything that you may wish you could change, or is there anything you wish you could have done better?
That's a very difficult question, because you know that I'm a driven person, so if something goes wrong, I'll make sure to correct it and fix it. So when I hardly look back to regret something I did, because you're building constantly your future, and the past just gives you experience to build a better future. But if I made an effort to see what I really would change, perhaps I spent too many years specializing myself in university. I did 5 years with the master degree, and probably didn't have enough finance then, had to compensate it on the job and doing my MBA. Perhaps at a young age we should learn much more things. And it's good to learn things from the base. If you're going to learn math, you have to learn math, and you have to learn accounting and finance. But perhaps we should learn it in smaller packages as you go along. So I would have probably, instead of doing a master degree in engineering, I should have spent more time in marketing or in finance. I learned it the hard way afterwards, so I can't regret it, because I do believe I learned it on my way.
It's amazing, really, because you strike me as like just a born entrepreneur, not like an academic at all. Like at all. If you told me you never went to school, I'd believe you, because you strike me as just these born entrepreneur. It's like you have the energy, you have the, this to that. I can't picture you getting the head stuck into the books for like years on end. So for me to hear that, it's very, very, very interesting. Because you could come across one of those guys like Zuckerberg or whoever, who's like, you hear the story, didn't finish school, just left and made his fortune, had to,
far away from that there.
I know you told me before, but I never would have guessed it. But I suppose the message for anybody watching this is to focus on their education. You're a big believer in that.
I'm a big believer in education. But it's not only education, right? At the end, world is much more complicated. I'm a big believer in traveling. We have to understand the world. We have to learn how to lead people. It is important. There's a place for everyone. There's some people that are key people in an organization, but they're just not there to lead. But if you want to lead an organization, you need leading skills. You can learn leading skills. You have to understand people. You have to understand what they expect when they go to jobs, to work. So you need an education. You need a good world picture today. And you need to have the tools. I mean, in business, there are tools to learn. You cannot go to the office one day and say, if you're in the car industry, this is the color and this is the color I like best, right?
Yeah.
There is a color, and there are studies on which the color development will be over the next 20 years. You have to know that stuff.
Yeah, very interesting, yeah. So Oliver, you've been in so many different industries: coffee, paper, glass, metal, mining. You've done business in 90 different countries. What do you do from the moment you walk into a new organization to take it from sometimes probably losing money, probably not going anywhere, probably very successful? What do you do? Like, how does the process start? Because you could be going into the shoes of somebody like Alex Ferguson at Manchester United, who's a highly successful, football manager. Nobody's ever going to match him, So, there's different sides, right? So, in your experience over doing business in 90 different countries and all these different industries, which I find fascinating, how do you establish the group objectives, and how do you get the whole thing motoring in the right direction? Like, how do you change the culture as well?
That's a very, very difficult question. There's many books written about that, right? The first 100 days, the first 90 days, what a CEO should do when he starts a new company. And then after many, many talks, I think there's one very important thing is to choose very, very ambitious goals. I'm sure you have friends that, or perhaps you, never ran before, and one day decide when you're 40 or 50 to run a marathon, which is a very ambitious goal.
Yeah.
If you have never done it, 42 kilometers is a very long distance. So you establish a very ambitious goal, and then you train the muscle to get there. And you know that anybody can run a marathon training 16 weeks. And the same happens with organizations. What you cannot do is look at the organization and see what they're capable of doing. You have to ignore what the organization is capable of doing. You have to establish a very ambitious goal, which is different in every type of organization, depending in which industry they are and where they are financially, which their competition is, etc. But at the end, you have to establish an incredible ambitious goal and then develop the muscle. You have then to train the organization to get there. The same like you do in your sports. So you can train for a marathon in 16 weeks. You can train an organization to do real breakthrough. And I think for that, not only you have to be ambitious, you have to make sure that you look for things that are totally different. Not everything is continuous improvement. And electricity is not the result of continuous improvement of a candle. It is,
good one, I like that.
The result of real breakthrough. You have to find totally new ways of doing things. With a new culture, I love the book from Simon Sinek on the why.
Yeah.
Right? It's not what you do, it's why you do it and train the people, but you also have to look at the market, how to increase prices, how to reduce complexity, how to drastically reduce cost. And there's systems and discipline. There's ZBB, there's all type of different tools that people, Kaizen and other tools, right? Six Sigma, and there's many, many tools. But they're useless if you don't have a clear objective where you want to get. So I think this ambitious goal and developing the muscle in the organization with breakthrough, totally different ways of changing, but always being focused on it is very important.
Have you done many turnarounds? Like where a company wasn't doing very well and then you turned it around?
I think that's the story of my life, yes.
So what do you think the key to that is? Because obviously not many people can do that, and then to turn an organization around from toxic culture, for example, not making money, it's a very, very difficult thing to do. Not many people can do it, What would be the ingredients, you think, to bake that cake?
And back to, you have to have a very clear vision of where you want to go and be able to express those very complex transformations, because they are. I mean, in the last job I was in the paper, it was at least 100 projects. And we went from a market cap from 300 million and sold it for almost 2 billion in 3 years. And that was a very, very important turnaround with 100 projects, but with a very, very clear objective in mind, which was the 2 billion. And so you have to make sure that you have, I always had a transformation office, which on one time you're operating the business, and you know how every company is. You make a budget, everybody believes in it, we have a set of projects that we're going to do to get there in December. And in January you have a fire, everybody moves to turn down that fire, and then it's February, there's another one in March, and in September you start doing the new budget, and you never really did a transformation. So I think you have to separate the operation of the business from the breakthrough transformation of it, because it's a total different speed. So it is important. I always had transformation offices, which is a very small group of people that work on documenting the projects, make sure that they're being followed up, and to discipline me to make sure that I am at the right place to make sure those projects happen.
Interesting. I don't know if you've ever heard of an entrepreneur in America called Ed Milet. He's a billionaire, and he talks about you have to become kind of like evangelical about things, especially if you have offices, say, all around the world. It's okay if you're sitting beside you and people can feel your energy, but what would you suggest to organizations to get that energy? I know you have the big goal up here. How often, for example, would you communicate with the organization as a whole and try to get that DNA embedded in the organization? What would be the strategy to get your DNA into that organization?
Clearly, communication is one of those pillars that you need to do a transformation. It's not the only one. I mean, there's some that are market, where you have to work with pricing and drastic cost reductions, and you have to improve cash, and you have all these business KPIs to follow, and culture is part of it, communication is part of it. Depends how big and complex the organization is, because you have to rely on your people. So how often you do it, I don't know, but the message has to arrive to the last person in your organization, and they have to have very clearly, in their mind, they have to understand what exactly we're looking for. So we all have to be pulling from the same side, right? So that's why the objectives have to be, you have to be able to put them in a simple manner that everybody understands it, and follow up on them. And communication depends on the size organization, the complexity, and how many countries you are, because the CEO cannot be everywhere. So depending on the size, you have to rely on your officers as well.
Well, I like the idea of setting super ambitious goals and probably never reaching them either, by the way, because there's a pastor I listen to online sometimes, and he said he was a pastor. He was a Christian pastor, and in Hollywood, I think it was, and he would meet the likes of the Brad Pitts and the stuff like that when they're working in coffee shops, and then they become ultra rich, and they're living in the Hollywood mansions in the hills, and then they become drug addicts and alcoholics, and and he said sometimes you've got to set your ambition so high that you never hit it.
But you know what to say, it's much better to have very high ambitions and failed and not achieving them than mediocre ones and achieving them.
Yeah, no, I agree with this, and I've learned a lot today. And just to finish off, what's the advice you'd give to your younger self? If you go back to your 20s, if you could give yourself any advice, good or bad, you can be as open as you want here.
It's very simple, but if I'll give an advice to each generation is different, and I'm sure the new generations are always better, even if we don't understand everything that's going on. If we look at history, I think each generation is better than the next, so I'm confident that the new one will be the same. But there's one thing, I'm sure successful people all put in the hours. There is no shortcut in life. You have to put in the hours. And if you want to have a very, very successful career, or you have very ambitious goals, there's no way to achieve them without putting in those very long hours.
Yeah, and you know what the interesting thing is, Oliver? A lot of men who become super successful then become guilty because they didn't spend so much time with their families, right? But then on the other hand, a lot of kids who've become successful after successful fathers, it's because they saw their father working so hard and not being at home all the time that actually made them become successful. You know what I mean?
I don't feel guilty yet. So,
and just a final one, because obviously I had met Oliver Jr. Last week, and I was very impressed, and just even from my own information, raising a 3-year-old, a boy, what advice have you given to your kids, growing up as kids? Like, how have you been as a dad and stuff like that? And, my father always just said to me, try your best, that was his thing for me. What was your kind of, because it's not easy being a dad, right? It's quite challenging at times. What's the advice you'd give to entrepreneurs who are also dads or mums and raising families at the same time?
Pretty much what I tell my employees is what I tell them at home, and it drives them crazy. I remember when my daughter would go out and compete, and she's very, very successful in what she does as well. And it was always, if you don't think you can win, don't go. I do think you have to mentalize. You have to mentalize yourself for success. And then exactly the same thing. When they're young and you grow up and say, in life, there's only results and excuses don't count. And I repeat all those things at home as well. I guess now my children are 25 and 26 and both have their careers. I guess now they believe in what I was telling them.
Oh, we've done a great job as far as I can see, So I think we'll wrap it up, Oliver, but there's been lots of wisdom shared here today, particular about having the big vision, which has given me a lot of ideas when I go back to the office, and to share the big vision of the organisation. Cause I think we need to do that a bit more because we're a bit fragmented. So I'd like to thank you very much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to get a lot of wisdom and a lot of value from you. So thank you, Oliver.
Thank you very much for having me, Derek.
Cheers, brother. Next time we'll have some.